So sometimes I watch cooking techniques or cooking gadgets come around and they feel a little bit like a trend to me. And sometimes I sit back and I'm like, I'm just going to wait for this to blow over. Like this will pass. And with the Instant Pot, it wasn't blowing over, which is a terrible visual because old-fashioned pressure cookers, the lids did actually blow off of them. Instant Pots are completely safe. But I started watching this, what I thought was a trend, and realized this is not a trend. This is really happening in kitchens. This is really, really helpful for busy families. And I also started watching chefs talk about it. It was buying them time in their restaurant kitchens. And this was really fascinating to me, that this was less trend and more an useful tool. So I wanted to dig in and get to the bottom of what was happening with these Instant Pots. And hopefully the big takeaway here is, hey, y'all, take your Instant Pot out of the box. Let's put it to use because this thing is legit. So I went to an expert. His name is Bruce Weinstein, and he's the author of many cookbooks, two of which we lean on quite often, the Instant Pot Bible and the Great Big Pressure Cooker book. And after we talked to Bruce, which is crazy informative, we move into the test kitchen with Cameron, and he and I cook up Instant Pot red beans and rice. I'm Ann Milnick, owner of Red Stick Spice Company, and your host. This is Smidgen.
You're listening to Smidgen, the Red Stick Spice Company podcast located directly between a dash and a pinch, where it's all about the tips, tricks, and tools to make home cooking easy and doable. We did our research and it's proven. Mealtime's where it's at. And now your host, Ann Milnick.
Bruce Weinstein is an award-winning international best-selling cookbook author with 32 published cookbooks and over 1 million copies of his books in print. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the Instant Pot Bible and the Great Big Pressure Cooker book. His books have appeared on bestseller lists in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. Bruce also hosts a series of online cooking video courses for Blueprint.com and has appeared on countless PBS cooking shows. He also produces a highly popular podcast with his partner, Mark, called Cooking with Bruce and Mark, which I think is required listening for all cooks. When he's not in the kitchen, Bruce teaches knitting and designs patterns for both men and women. And he lives in rural Connecticut, which sounds like a wonderful place to live, with his partner Mark and his two adorable collies, Spritz and Nosh. Welcome, Bruce. I'm so excited you're here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to connect with you. So I'm a cooking instructor, and I have a little gourmet grocery store and teach cooking classes. And I'll admit, we do teach Instant Pot classes, but I was a late adopter. I was late to the party for sure. I have a instructor that teaches with me, Lily, and she was teaching Instant Pot classes elsewhere, and she kept after me saying, you need to teach these classes. And I was like, what does that look like? Are we watching a timer display? Like, how does that work exactly? I'm a trained chef. All I need is a knife and a sheet pan and some tongs, and I don't use gadgets. And then she pulled a cheesecake out of that thing. And I was like, okay, hold on, let's talk about this. So we incorporated Instant Pot classes. We each time we put one on the schedule, we could book it 3 times over. That's how long the waiting list is. And in my world, when I work with marketing and ideas for my products, we always talk about, in meetings, we talk about pain points. Like, what's the customer's pain point? And I would say Instant Pots are definitely one of those things, because when folks come in the class, we hear more often than anything, I have one, it's in the box, and I don't know what to do with it. So that's sort of how I got to this place with Instant Pots. But I do want to hear how you got to this place to being easily one of the top experts in the country on pressure cookers. And now you have these 2 books that I think should be on the shelves for folks who are interested in pressure cookers. So tell us how you got here.
Well, thanks, Ann. First of all, I have to say I have the same experience when I teach pressure cooker classes, and especially if they're Instant Pot classes. They sell out the second they go up online and the waiting list. You're right. You can have one, and then you could book 3 more from the waiting list. It's amazing. And I also hear from a lot of people that they bought it and they haven't taken it out of the box yet, which is kind of silly. And I think what I've discovered is that is not a matter of people being afraid to use a pressure cooker. I actually think it's the technology, it's the gadgetry, it's all the buttons and the dials and the LED screens, and people not wanting to have to handle all of that. That's kind of what I think is going on with that. But the way I got into pressure cooking was actually many, many years before electric pressure cookers even came out. I'd been using a pressure cooker since the early 80s, basically for one dish. I bought it to make risotto in 7 minutes with no stirring. And you've done it. I'm sure you've done it even in your classes. You know how amazing that is.
It is.
You know, risotto takes 45 minutes to an hour where you're endlessly stirring in warm broth into the rice to get it creamy and smooth. And with a pressure cooker, either on the stove or an electric or with the Instant Pot, it's 7 to 10 minutes without stirring. It's an amazing thing. And that's what got me started in pressure cooking years and years ago.
We are going to talk about two particular books, and I just want to clarify for listeners. The Great Big Pressure Cooker book covers both electric pressure cookers. Most people think of the Instant Pot brand, or a stovetop pressure cooker like your grandma used. And that's where folks tell the story about it taking up the ceiling tiles. Whereas the Instant Pot Bible does focus specifically on electric pressure cookers.
And I'm going to be even more specific. The Instant Pot Bible focuses only on using the Instant Pot. And for full disclosure, everyone needs to understand that there is a difference between most electric pressure cookers on the market and the Instant Pot. Instant Pot cooks at a higher pressure, higher PSI, pounds per square inch, than standard electric pressure cookers. So it cooks faster than a standard electric pressure cooker. And that's why after we had such a great success with the Great Big Pressure Cooker book, we decided it was really important to have a book that was just for Instant Pot, because the timings for Instant Pot are their own thing. You can't just take a recipe written for an electric pressure cooker and guarantee it's going to work the timings in an Instant Pot.
I do want to talk about something that kind of made me snort laugh as I was reading it. In the introduction to the Great Big Pressure Cooker book, you talk about the 4 pressure cooker personality types. There's the ingenue, there's Nervous Nellie, there's the Doubting Thomas, and there's the Culinary Apostle. So today, I'm the Culinary Apostle, but I was a combination between the ingenue, like squirrel, and the Doubting Thomas. The bulk of what we see in the classrooms is Nervous Nellie, but what I liked about the introduction to both of these books, which, let me just say this for listeners who don't read the introduction to cookbooks, this is, no one in particular, these two books, reading the intro was game-changing for me. One thing that I noticed the theme throughout talking about these 4 personality types was reading the instruction manual for your pressure cooker. I realize this is a podcast and you can't see who's raising their hand, but raise your hand if you threw away the instruction manual to your Instant Pot. That's me.
My hand's up right now, and I will tell you, if you've thrown it away, go online. Every manufacturer has it online. Don't even go to their website and search for it. Go into Google and say Instant Pot Lux Owner's Manual. You will get a link to it. You can either read it online, you can download it, and that will work with, my guess is, almost every brand out there.
Tell us why it's so important to read the instruction manual. You say in multiple times, a pressure cooker cookbook or blog is not your owner's manual to your pressure cooker.
Oh, that's so true. What a cookbook is going to give you are recipes with settings that tell you cook it at high pressure for X amount of minutes. Every single brand out there, every model, even within the same brand, may have a different way of getting you to that pressure, a different kind of button to push. Sometimes that button may be labeled high pressure. Sometimes it may be labeled cook. Sometimes it may be labeled, pressure cook. So you have to read your instruction manual to know how to accomplish what we are asking you to do in our recipe. And let's face it, one cookbook can't be the owner's manual and guide to every kind of electric pressure cooker out there. So we could tell you how long to cook it and at what pressure and whether you need to brown first, but you have to look at your owner's manual to see how to accomplish that.
So I was listening to a recent podcast episode of yours called Instant Pot FAQ. And that episode, you took questions from the Instant Pot Facebook community, which I recommend folks both listen to the podcast and join the Facebook community. And you took questions from there. And one thing that was interesting to me that I didn't realize, and I'm wondering if you see this as like a blanket rule, that the warm function should always be turned off before you start pressure cooking. First of all, tell us what happens when the warm function is on and the pressure cooking ends.
So if you are pressure cooking with an electric pressure cooker and you have a keep warm function on, in many, many models of electric pressure cookers, as soon as the pressure cooking is done, the keep warm clicks on, and that will keep the contents in the pot at 140 degrees, which eventually it might come back down to pressure where you could open it, but it'll take a lot longer because there's a heat source still going on. Now, I do hear from people who say, well, I have a model that it doesn't go to keep warm until after the pressure's been released. And I'm like, you know what? We're back to that problem of our book can't be an owner's manual for everyone. And since everyone's machine is a little bit different, it's much safer to say, put the keep warm off. That way, when it's done cooking, the machine will shut off. And if we're doing a natural release, which means letting the machine sit and letting the pressure drop naturally, that will happen. If the keep warm is on, in a lot of machines, that won't happen for a very long time.
So it's slowing down your natural release.
It slows it down tremendously because the heating element continues to stay on. That's correct.
But if you're out there on the internet looking at recipes, is there any way to know whether or not that recipe writer, that blogger, did that?
That is the problem with recipes that you find online. You have to know the source. It has to be a reputable source. It has to be a known, named place it's coming from, either a well-known food magazine or food network where you know they're testing them. Make sure the recipe says it was tested. Otherwise, there's no way to know if the person who wrote the recipe tested it at all, or certainly if they tested it with all the variations that could possibly happen with your machine. So if you're not going to use a cookbook, and some people don't like to, and they feel like all these recipes are free online, that's okay. But you have to be very careful about researching who you're getting the recipe from, and don't get angry if for some reason the recipe doesn't work. It's probably not your fault. It could easily be the person who posted the recipe just didn't test it properly.
And that's where the beauty of all of this information online and social media comes in. You have an opportunity to reach out to that blogger in their comment section, or, gosh, I see it on the Facebook group. Wow, it's just like the amount of feedback folks get when they post a question. It's just this beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. Hundreds of people respond. And I can tell you, it's not just with bloggers and online. Even as a cookbook author, with social media, I get questions through my website, bruceandmark.com, all the time about recipes in a book, or people have questions, that's even in a book where things are very well explained, although, as you said at the beginning of this, possibly if they read the introduction, that question might have gotten answered. But hey, not everybody reads the introduction.
There you go. So I want to talk about a question that we get from customers a lot, and it actually happened to me. So I'm going to give you the whole scenario. I was doing a demo, 16 people staring at me. I decided that I was going to take this barley recipe, this barley risotto, and I would like to be able to call it barloto. And I took this barley recipe and I decided I'm going to double it. I'm going to move it from a 6-quart to an 8-quart, and I'm going to add some mushrooms to it. So I'm going to saute chopped mushrooms with wine and a little extra olive oil at the beginning, saute out all that liquid, and then proceed with the recipe. And I'm in front of 16 people. And my staff is so scarred by this, we only refer to it as the barley incident.
I'm sorry to be laughing, but I have a feeling something bad happened.
It said burn. The readout said burn, and everyone in the group, one by one, kept raising their hand to politely point out that the Instant Pot was reading burn, as I'm doing like my other part of my non-Instant Pot demo. So that scenario has actually played out a couple of times in classes with different foods, but here's the kicker. I read the introduction to your book. And barley, who knew, is one of the foamy foods. I think apples, pasta, and barley. Also,
barley in particular has, when you cook it, barley water that comes out. It's a very slimy, kind of thick, pasty water, and that foams up, and it's very starchy, and that will give you a burn.
The other thing is that I used a pearled barley rather than a traditional...
The hulless barley, yeah,
whole grain barley. So with that whole story, take me from beginning to end. What happened?
So the first thing is you went from a 6-quart to an 8-quart and doubled your ingredients, which sometimes is not a problem. If you were doing a beef stew and it's just carrots and onions and chuck roast and some wine and herbs, as long as you don't go over that max fill line, you're probably okay. But with ingredients like barley or apples or other foamy products, when you start doubling them, you're doubling the amount of starch and foam, and that's not a good thing. So what's happened was you had all of this extra starchy, sticky liquid coming out. You're in a bigger volume pot, so it's now going to take longer to reach high pressure, and that's the key here. You went from a 6-quart pot, which had a smaller volume, so it would get the high pressure faster. You put more foamy ingredients in a larger space. So they have a longer time to boil and boil and boil and boil before the machine can come to high pressure and the temperature can drop a bit and it starts to cook. During that extra time, all that starchy liquid settled to the bottom and it burned. Now, I will say that occasionally we all get a burn notice. If you catch it immediately, because that's the nice thing about Instant Pot, is it's very sensitive and it tells you if there's a burn the second one little something burns down there. If you do a quick release and you unplug it and you take your ingredients out, you pour them out, chances are you could still salvage that meal because there'll be very little burn to the bottom of the pot at the beginning. So you could scrape that out, put everything back in, add a little more liquid. But in your case, it sounds like they were telling you that you had a problem and you weren't listening. So by the time you addressed it, I'm sure that was not salvageable.
When you see that burn...
Unplug it instantly and then do a quick release.
Okay.
Take the lid off. Use pot holders to take the insert out or use a ladle to start ladling off all the food, not scraping the bottom because you don't want to scrape off the burn stuff. And if you've got the burn notice, if you start right away, there's not going to be that much burn. So you probably still can salvage what's in there. So get everything out except what's burned up to the bottom. Then scrape that off, throw it out, clean the pot, put everything back in. Now, if you get the burn notice because you did something like added too much a starchy or foamy food, well, that you're going to have to put back just half as much and plus a little more stock. If you got it for some other odd reason, like, trying to imagine you were making a spaghetti and meat sauce, and for some reason the spaghetti sauce or the canned tomatoes you used were a little thicker, say, than the ones, and this is a good point to bring up. When I use canned diced tomatoes, I use them packed in juice. I had a reader comment to me once that she follows my recipe exactly, and every time she tries to make this pasta dish with canned diced tomatoes, she gets the burn. And when we finally, after about 2 weeks of talking to her, I had her send me a picture of the label of her tomatoes. Sure enough, she bought some that are packed in tomato puree, not in juice. Mm-hmm. So that extra thick liquid was causing the burn. So we found out that reason. So let's say that happened and you use a tomato in puree, so you got the burn instead of, I wouldn't use tomato in juice. So you take everything out, clean up the bottom, put it back in, but this time you have to add a little more liquid because the extra liquid will thin out your tomato puree and that'll work. and then you can go back to cooking it and pray that you don't get the burn a second time.
But let's talk about that burn when it's not a burn and it's cooked on the bottom. If we were in a saute pan on the stovetop, that's fond. And that, we're very fond of fond. That's deliciousness. So is, in the risotto, in the barley incident at my store, I also think one of my issues was that sauteing of the mushrooms at the beginning, and that I did develop some fond down there, and that I didn't scrape it properly, because at the end of the day, the Instant Pot just thinks it's burning something. It doesn't know that it's fond, correct?
That is true. It knows that something has been burned because it senses a heat differential happening that shouldn't be happening. In the case of fond, you're talking about the caramelized natural sugars that are in meats and vegetables. And those brown on the bottom of the pan, and then we scrape them up with liquid. We deglaze the pan to scrape them up, whether it's with wine or with brandy or with stock or even with water. In your case, if you did not scrape every bit of that mushroom fond off the bottom of the pot, then you're even asking for more trouble with the extra sticky and foamy barley that you're going to add. You might have gotten it anyway from the barley had you scraped it up, because you doubled the amount of barley in a larger pot. But you're correct that it does not know the difference in fond and other kinds of sticky stuff. So if you are browning a chuck roast or stew meat or chicken thighs or mushrooms in your Instant Pot or electric pressure cooker, before you are going to add other ingredients, you must remove them. You must add some kind of liquid and scrape up every bit of that to keep the machine from thinking it's burned, or then from having other materials in your stew sticking to that bit of fond and building up so that it gets thicker and does actually burn.
And I do want to go back to the barley, that I use pearl barley instead of whole barley. And I think it relates to your recipes in the beginning of your books are breakfast, and you do oats in the Instant Pot, but you're never using a rolled oat or a quick cooking oat. These are always Irish oats or steel cut.
They're always steel cut oats because it's the whole grain. It has the bran, it has the germ, and all of that extra fiber from that will keep the oats from just getting too pasty, too sticky, and burning. If you try to use rolled oats, 9 times out of 10, you will get a burn signal. And I had to say 9 times out of 10 because if I say you always will, there will be someone who made it who didn't get a burn for whatever reason.
Of course.
And that is anecdotal, and that's great, and I'm thrilled that person didn't get a burn, but you shouldn't count on that happening.
Okay, let's talk about rice a little bit, because I think that grain, your risotto story is my exact story. The cheesecake was the game changer. Let's just, get that out of the way. But risotto, I was pretty blown away by risotto with arborio rice. But I do rice a lot in the Instant Pot, and I like rice made with a portion of the liquid being coconut milk, which is very high in sugar. And I occasionally get a burn notice. I've noticed that depending on my brand of coconut milk, I'll get a burn, and then other times not, when I change up brands. Can you speak to those high sugar ingredients in the Instant Pot and what might be happening?
Well, sugar is always going to superheat under pressure like that and start to stick to the bottom and burn. In terms of coconut milk, my guess is it's a combination of the sugars in the coconut milk as well as the fat content. And the reason why a super high fat coconut milk might lead you to get a burn notice more than a lower fat one is that a lower fat coconut milk is going to have more liquid, more water in it, because the volume of that can is the same, correct? So in a high fat coconut milk can, there's going to be less water and more coconut fat. And that lack of water was what also will help lead to the burn and lead to those sugars then caramelizing and burning. So in terms of substituting coconut milk for stock or water in a recipe, it's always a good idea to use either a low-fat or a more watery coconut milk. If you want to add some coconut cream or a super rich, fatty coconut milk, then just go ahead and add a few tablespoons of that on top of your broth or water, but not as a substitute. And then I think that'll get rid of all your problems.
And don't stir it in?
Oh, no, stir it in.
Okay.
But it's okay to add the extra thick fat as long as you're not substituting it for the liquid, because the liquid is what you need to keep things moving and to keep things lubricated on the bottom of the pan so that it doesn't burn.
That can of coconut milk that I use to make up, let's say I'm making a cup of rice, I need 2 cups of liquid, and I'm using that can of coconut milk as part of that 2 cups of liquid on the stovetop, that doesn't correlate in the Instant Pot.
No, because on the stovetop is different. You're going to control that heat down to very, very low. You're watching it. And my guess is you're an experienced chef, and when you look at a pan on the stove going, you'll look at it and know instantly if things are going right or if something's going wrong. And I'm sure that you've had the experience that I've had in making rice on a stovetop, where occasionally I've had to add a little extra liquid in the middle of the cooking because for some reason it's absorbed it all much faster than I thought. That can't happen in an Instant Pot. You can't open it and check. You can't just lift the lid and look at it. And because you're cooking in a sealed environment under pressure, you can't just substitute a very loose liquid in that quantity of stock or water for a thick liquid like coconut milk. So if a whole can of coconut milk is probably going to be about 1 2/3 cups, that's an awful lot to substitute for that much water or stock and expect in an Instant Pot that it's still going to come out.
That's awesome. That's like, ding, the light bulb just went off. So thank you. With my Instant Pots, I have never used any of the presets. I use saute and I use manual. Talk about presets on Instant Pots. You know, mine has yogurt, it has meat, it has chicken, which is kind of makes me chuckle a little bit because chicken, like, is that for boneless, skinless chicken breasts? Are we talking about a whole bone-in chicken? You know, talk about those presets because you talked about this earlier in the podcast, how for a lot of folks who haven't taken it out of the box, it's that technology, it's that all those buttons. So talk about some of those.
I'm going to make some enemies with this answer, and I don't want to make enemies. It is an Instant Pot. It's not a magic pot. And the machine does not know the difference between meat or chicken inside of it. And when I spoke to Robert Wang, who invented the Instant Pot, when I first started working on this book, we had a long discussion about those buttons because I wanted to know, was there really a difference? If I hit the chicken button and gave it 40 minutes, does it cook at the same pressure, I asked him, as if I pressed the beef button? Because maybe he did that, so the chicken needs slightly less pressure or meat. And his answer shocked me. He's like, no, there's no difference. All of the buttons that say a kind of food like meat, like chicken, like soup, broth, in all of those, all they do is turn the machine under high pressure, and they each have a preset amount of time in them that Robert Wang and his people thought was probably about right. But that time is also changeable on your machine. And if you look at all the models that have come out since that very first model he came out with so many buttons, those preset buttons started to go away. Mm-hmm. And so the latest model they have, the Max, it doesn't have beef or chicken at all. It has just pressure cook, slow cook, grains, and grains is great because it does do something different than just going to high pressure. Yogurt, rice. The buttons are now all about technique and making the machine do something different, as opposed to what's the ingredient you put in, thinking that the machine magically knows what it is. So if you have an older model, you can ignore every one of those chicken, beef, when you're making soup, you don't have to hit the soup button in an old model. Just hit manual and pressure cook to the time you want it to be. We try to explain all of this in the beginning of the Instant Pot Bible to take all the fear out of people and the confusion out of people's minds about it. Just think about your machine, if you're just making chicken or beef or a soup or a stew, as having an on and off. Forget about those other buttons and just use, if your machine says manual, that's the button. If your machine says pressure cook, that's the button. Hit that button and hit the time. And in the Instant Pot Bible, we tell you that in every single recipe. What are your button options?
So that goes back to that core requirement before you ever pick up the cookbook of reading your manual and understanding your pressure cooker. That's
right, because you have to know on your pressure cooker that you have, if it's an Instant Pot, depends on which model it is, and if it's a Fagor or a Cuisinart or something else, you have to know how to get your machine to high pressure. That's the most important thing you need to know. There are a couple of recipes in our book, and only a couple that use low pressure. I believe our cheesecakes are one of them. So you need to know how to get your machine to high pressure or low pressure. After that, we don't have any recipes in our books for making yogurt because basically there's one way to do it. You use the yogurt button and you follow your owner's manual of how to do that. And there's 1,000 people with YouTube videos showing you how to do that. That didn't require, we thought, a recipe. So we focused on the pressure cooking buttons, not the yogurt button, not the rice button, just the buttons that do pressure cooking.
You mentioned in the intro portion of one of the books that and I remember yogurt being one, but there was another item that you said, there's no reason for us to write this recipe. It's you need to follow what is given to you in your manual. Was that rice?
I think that's rice because these books come with a rice measuring cup. They tell you how much rice to put to how much water. Each model, each machine is different. So I can't give you a recipe that uses your rice button because every rice button on every one of these pressure cookers might do something different. So we had to stick with the technique that is the same in everything, which is going to high pressure or going to low pressure.
Perfect. Okay, I want to talk about food. I want to take a deep dive into some recipes. So I'm going to talk about the sort of my most recent, latest, greatest that I've made in the Instant Pot. That was just like, whoa, this is so awesome. So I did a Middle Eastern, it's essentially a rice pilaf. It's called Mujadara, if I'm...
I love Mujadara.
Okay. So started with, I essentially made an Italian sausage. I took some ground pork and I added fennel and a lot of spices to it.
You put meat in it.
Yeah. So sautéed that on sauté function with some other aromatics, and my lentils went in. We learned quickly with this dish, French green lentils are the way to go. Brown lentils are delicious, but they do turn to mush. So it's, we eat with our eyes first. I think we actually eat with our phones first, but the French green lentils stay whole. So, and that gets a short pressure cook and a quick release, and then you open it back up. And you add in your rice, your raw rice, and then lid goes back on, another pressure cook, and then that's a short natural release followed by a quick release to get the lid to unlock and open, and then all that heat that's still there. And, my spice blend called Ras Al Hanout went in along with a cinnamon stick and some salt. And then after that second cook with that short natural release and then a final quick release, we fold in fresh spinach, and that heat that's there from the pressure cooker wilts the spinach. All the while, all that's going on, I'm at my sauté pan doing something that I feel I don't think the pressure cooker can do this, but I want crispy. We just slivered some leeks, but you could do shallot as well. I want crispy leek or shallot to top that, along with a little bit of yogurt to cool it down. So I'm at my sauté pan doing like that shallow fry to get those crispy onions to go on top, which is, a super simple process. And you've got a little bit of time on your hands while the pressure cooking's going on. And that just makes for this gorgeous bowl of protein. And, it's just all a meal in this one dish. And that meat could easily be left out. We have a vegetarian in our family, so certainly know that I can skip that step. And then those crispy onions on top. And I felt like super culinary apostle to the Instant Pot with that dish, because I was doing multiple pressure cooks. I was really getting a handle on when I needed that quick release, when I needed that natural release, how long that natural release should be, which, that leads me to another issue I have with the Instant Pot about the natural release. After the count down of the pressure, then the count up of the natural release, we often find ourselves looking at the display in busy cooking classes going, where are we? Are we in pressure? Are we counting down? Or are we counting up? And making sure that we set that timer when that natural release does have to be caught. And yeah.
That is the most important thing you could do. As soon as your machine counts down from cooking and you're doing a natural release, it set your timer right away. Make sure your machine was not on keep warm, because if for some reason you had accidentally left it on, unplug the machine and let it sit and set your timer. Yep, that is. And you're doing multiple cooks in each recipe is really a fun thing to be able to do with the Instant Pot. You did that with your Mujadara rice and lentil dish. We do that a lot of times if we're making pot roasts or soups that have vegetables that go in as well, where the meat might take an hour, but I don't want to have carrots in there for an hour. So the meat will go, it'll have 50 minutes under pressure. It'll do a natural release. Then we'll open it up, throw the vegetables in, bring it back to high pressure for just 4 or 5 minutes and do a quick release. So that way you can get everything cooked just the way it needs to be.
Let's talk about that recipe you just went through, because you talked about it being a stew or a roast. In those types of cuts of protein, let's say you didn't set your timer and you did forget, and that natural, and it was just sitting there longer than, say, what the recipe called for. Not a big issue with something like a chuck roast or stew meat, but we're having a whole different conversation if that's a pot of rice, correct?
Well, with rice, if you're doing a natural release with chuck roast, your natural release is done when the little pin drops down and the lid unlocks so you can open it. There are times in some of our recipes where we only want the natural release to go a certain amount of time. Like we want it to go 10 minutes and then do a quick release at that point. So hopefully you're setting your timer. But with rice, that's an interesting thing in its own category. When I cook rice dishes in the Instant Pot, whether they're brown or white, once the cooking time counts down and is done, I like to do a quick release, but then not open the lid. And that still gives it some time to steam and to soften and to finish absorbing all that last bits of moisture, but not under pressure. If you were to forget to do that step and let it sit under a natural release, something as delicate as rice, you're going to overcook it. The heat is off in the pot, so it won't burn on the bottom, but the residual cooking and boiling and pressure will overcook your food if you forget and let the natural release happen or let it go too long.
So let's say you did that quick release, opened it, took a bite. Let's say you saw some liquid, took a bite. It was a little too al dente for you. Popping the lid back on, but not turning it on any function, will that help you any get you there?
If it's a dish like pasta or rice, that will. If there's some liquid left, but it's a little too al dente, if you're cooking a stew and you open it after the natural release and the meat is still a little too tough for you, then you have to bring it back to pressure. And sometimes the bringing it back to pressure is enough cooking that you could do a quick release as soon as it hits pressure and let it go. But if you're cooking pasta or rice or grains and they're a little al dente, I'm hesitant to say put it back under pressure. Just close it, seal it, let it sit a few more minutes. There's enough heat, especially if you seal the valve, that just a few more minutes might give you what you're looking for.
Okay. Walk us through your most latest and greatest in the Instant Pot. What have you cooked?
Well, it's so funny. We just turned in a manuscript yesterday for yet a new Instant Pot book.
Really?
Which is actually coming out so fast it'll be out in July.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's called Freezer to Instant Pot. And nothing gets thawed. You put frozen pork roast, chuck roast, stew meat, ribs, everything goes in frozen. We give you the technique and the timing to do that. So I've sort of been kind of working on all of that stuff. But I will say that I have a couple of go-to recipes that, and in fact, I wish you could see my kitchen counter right now, because sitting on it is a block of frozen grass-fed ground beef, some sweet yellow peppers, some marinara sauce, some ziti, and some onions. And I'm going to be making a pasta casserole from that frozen meat, and it's going to take me 30 minutes in the Instant Pot for lunch when we're done talking.
Is your pasta going in with frozen meat?
No. So when the meat's frozen, we have to do a two-step thing. So I will put the meat in with a little bit of broth, not much, on a rack, and I'll give it about 18 minutes to thaw it. I'll pull the rack out, I'll break up the meat, I'll add all the other ingredients, including the pasta, let it go another 4 minutes, and then it's done.
Wow. That book's going to be a game changer.
I hope so.
Talk about a pain point. We hear folks say that all the time. Well, I planned on cooking, but I forgot to defrost the meat.
I did, it happens. In fact, I posted in the Instant Pot Facebook community group a video of my making pulled pork with a frozen pork shoulder. And it's the technique of doing it again on a rack. I steamed the pork over a bottle of beer with all the spices. 2 hours later, it's done. You pull the pork out, shred it up, boil that sauce down, mix it back in. And that was right out of the freezer. And in 2.5 hours, you're having pulled pork.
Wow. That's amazing.
It is. The machine is game-changing in so many ways.
For sure. We're going to wrap it up here soon. I do want to ask you a question I ask everyone. If you had a novice, I introduced you to a novice cook, Instant Pot's in the box, what is the one dish you would teach that person?
Right out of the gate, I would say make something really simple like buttered noodles, because in 4 minutes, you'll have the most perfectly cooked, delicious buttered noodles without turning your stove on in one pot, and it will hopefully inspire you to want to do other more wonderful things. And part of why I pick that is because I've made maybe 35 to 40 videos of cooking dishes from the Instant Pot Bible that I've posted on Facebook, and they're all on my YouTube channel, which is Cooking with Bruce and Mark. The one that got the most shares, and we got about 700 shares in 2 days, was just buttered noodles.
Wow.
Now, I will say that I did post one for some Chinese noodles, like some spicy Dan Dan noodles, and that one did get 17,000 views in the first month. So clearly there's something about Chinese noodles people like too, but it didn't get as many shares as the simple buttered noodles.
It's got to be because it's approachable. You have to have, you have to be thinking, I can do that. I can make that.
Exactly. And I don't want to scare people with pork shoulders if they're not, experienced cooks, even though pulled pork is so simple. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but you're right. Buttered noodles are approachable, and they're easy, and they're understandable. And when I show you that you could do it in 4 minutes, well, why wouldn't you then take your Instant Pot out of the box and do it?
Exactly. Well, we're going to wrap up. I want you to tell everyone where they can find you, the podcast and all these other places. We're going to link to all of that in the show notes, but tell everyone where they can find you.
So my website is bruceandmark.com, and our podcast is Cooking with Bruce and Mark, and you can find that wherever you like to get them from. You can check out our YouTube video channel, which is also Cooking with Bruce and Mark, and see the dozens and dozens of videos I've done of my making recipes from the Instant Pot Bible. And our books, the Instant Pot Bible, as well as the Great Big Pressure Cooker book, and the new book, Freezer to Instant Pot, the cookbook, are all available on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold.
Love it. Bruce, thank you so much. Is it okay if my producer, Catherine, and I just show up on your doorstep one day?
Sure. We have gorgeous weather. And again, we're not going above 80 all summer, so.
We're definitely there.
It's nice talking to you.
You too. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks again to Bruce, and now we are heading over to the Red Stick Spice Company test kitchen. We're cooking up red beans and rice in the Instant Pot. Now, this is usually a Monday, Louisiana classic Monday dish that cooks all day, but we're going to get this one done in 37 minutes in the Instant Pot. Welcome back. We're to the cooking segment of Smidgen, the Smidgen podcast, and we're here in the Red Stick Spice Company teaching kitchen, and we're here with Cameron. Cameron, at the ripe old age of 15, has been working for me for 3 years.
3 years. Yeah.
So let's just everybody calm down. Before the great state of Louisiana said that he could be employed by me, which was 14 years old, he was a volunteer with his mother's full supervision, his mother being here most all of the time. So let's just clear that up. If anybody was getting ready to write that email, it's all good.
All legal.
Yeah. Thanks, Cameron. But this has been really interesting having you here with me because it was a little bit of a tough sell for your mom to convince me for you to work here. I was like, tell me why a 12-year-old should work here. And then
honestly, yeah,
you started cooking and it was like, what? So you're easily one of the most proficient cooks that I know that works here at Red Stick Spice for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think that's so cool that you've known for a long time that culinary is where you want to be, right?
Been a hot minute.
Yeah. So tell me, I love the story about when it first clicked for you. You're sitting crisscross applesauce in your living room watching who?
Rachel Ray. Just met Bright Orange Kitchen.
Yeah. And you just knew at that point, I want that job.
Yeah.
So way long before your time, I had a similar experience, but it was with Julia Child. That was really the only food TV back in the day. And I watched her and I always wanted to be like that. So I guess in that sense, we're the same.
The same.
Yeah. All right. So
Nothing new.
We're talking about Instant Pots. So I want to get the rice going so that it can be doing its thing. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the Instant Pot because you're in almost all of our cooking classes. You help out with the classes. And you are often we teach Instant Pot cooking classes, which that was a tough sell for me. Like, what is that going to look like? Us watching a timer, but we'll get to that in a second. First, let's get the rice going. So I've got this Instant Pot and it says hot. And so I've got it on the saute mode on high. And what I'm going to do is have you drizzle in some garlic extra virgin olive oil. And I'm going to add in the raw rice. So this is Louisiana. I'm using popcorn rice, which is a super aromatic rice. And I've got raw rice going into the Instant Pot with the garlic extra virgin olive oil. And then what we're going to do is add some flavor. So if we were in an old school classic kitchen like the Ritz-Carlton or some banquet hall, we would be sauteing this raw rice with fresh aromatics like onions, celery. You've heard me talk about this a billion times because we teach it in every class. So let's get the flavor in first. Let's get a tablespoon of Sarriette in.
Sure.
I put a teaspoon in there for you. So
Make it extra difficult. Got it.
Yep.
Math.
So
1, 2.
Teachable moment. 3 teaspoons of Sarriette. So Sarriette is our spice blend that we created as one of our many all-purpose blends. So Sarriette is all the good stuff: onion, garlic, and shallot. But on top of that, it's not just the good stuff, it's all roasted. So when those onions roast or when that garlic roasts, the sweetness comes up and makes it super flavorful, very rich in umami, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a great all-purpose blend for those times when maybe you can't chop an onion for time reasons or don't have an onion. We just want to make sure we get fat and flavor onto and into this raw grain. So I'm sauteing the raw grain, and tell everyone what I say in nearly every cooking class, we're not looking to brown the
You're
grain.
not looking to brown it or anything like that. You're really just waiting for the kind of nutty aromatic smell to come through. And this step just kind of makes the rice taste like rice.
Yeah, and it gives it great flavor. It's nearly impossible to get flavor into a grain of rice after it's cooked. If you've forgotten the salt in your cooking water, then it's going to be super bland, and there's not a whole lot you can do other than pour a whole lot of gravy on it. But making grains flavorful like this is called the Pilaf Method in classic cooking. Doesn't really matter, but the Pilaf Method, and it just opens up the cell walls. It lets some of that fat in, it lets some flavor in, and what you get at the end is a super flavorful grain that could be eaten on its own. It's so delicious. So we've got that sauteed around. I can smell a little bit of nuttiness.
For
like
sure.
Cameron said, we're not looking to brown it or pop it or anything like that. So now, super cool thing about the Instant Pot and rice is that rice is typically a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 parts liquid to 1 part rice, but in Instant Pot it's equal. So I've got a 1.5 cups of rice, and we're going to go in with this 1.5 cups of vegetable stock. So you can go ahead and pour that in, and we're probably going to get a good sizzle. That is a very good podcast sound you just made.
I agree.
So, thank you. All right, so we've got that moved around, and now I'm going to press cancel and come away from the saute mode. So I'm going to say cancel, and I'm going to go to pressure cook, and we're going to pressure cook this guy for a whole whopping 4 minutes. Crazy town, right?
Sounds good. Better than normal.
So I have got to knock that down to 4 minutes, and I will here very soon work this Instant Pot correctly. So let's talk about my many famous Instant Pot moments in cooking classes. Surely...
Make sure it's on 4 minutes.
It's on 4 minutes instead of...
Hours.
4 hours. That was one that I did. But you know what? In the end, it was fine.
Just saying. We just got the other Instant Pot out.
It was just fine. But it was definitely on 4 hours instead of 4 minutes. I've also had an entire demo where the room is full of people and they're all looking at me and I'm demoing the food and the Instant Pot is next to me and it reads the entire time, burn. So that was interesting, and I can see them all looking at it and they don't quite know what to say. And finally, a friend of mine who's in the audience said, I think something's happening in the Instant Pot. It says burn. But in the end, it was actually all fine because the Instant Pot, let me start it first. So I've got 4 minutes. I'm on high pressure, and I'm going to say start. And so it's not exactly 4 minutes. It's going to take some time to come up the pressure. It's going to beep when it's at pressure, and then it's going to be at high pressure for 4 minutes. It's going to beep again, and at the end of that 4 minutes, you either allow it to naturally reduce pressure, or you hit the button and all the pressure releases. So we're actually going to manually release at the end of 4 minutes. So, 4 minutes, and we will have rice. So I'm going to push this one back, and then we've got to do some cut chop because we are making today a Louisiana classic, red beans and rice. So we are going to take dried beans and put them in the Instant Pot, and 30 minutes later, again, mind blown, 30 minutes later, we have this beautiful pot of creamy red beans that is that Monday, classic Monday supper that I grew up with. So let's chop our aromatics while we talk more about the Instant Pot because, as I said, I was a little late to the game, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to get you on this bell pepper.
Okay.
So we need half a bell pepper. And we want it a nice small dice where we're not seeing gigantic pieces of bell pepper in the red beans. And I know you're completely capable of that, so I need to say no more. So half of that bell pepper. And I'm going to tackle the celery because we've got to get these aromatics sauteing in here. So I'm flattening out my celery. But so one of our instructors that instructs here, Lily, she teaches quite a few classes here. And she kept talking to me about an Instant Pot class. Like, we've really got to do this. And I said, this is crazy. All we're going to do is stand around and watch this timer. And I don't know what that class looks like. And she just kept after me and kept after me. And I was like, it's a gadget. Chefs don't use gadgets. All I need is a sheet pan and a knife and some tongs, and I can cook anything. And then what did she pull out of the Instant Pot?
A whole cheesecake.
A cheesecake. So I said, hold up, let's go ahead and talk about this. Maybe we should just, chat about it a little bit. So we now teach Instant Pot classes. In addition to teaching Instant Pot classes, every class I think we have put an Instant Pot component into. So other than the cheesecake, what has been some of the most impressive things you've seen us pull out of this thing?
I mean, she also pulled out like this chocolate truffle cake thing that was basically just chocolate mousse slice.
Yeah.
It was pretty much the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
You're a huge chocolate.
That was pretty amazing. One thing that I'm, the win over factor for me, big time, was risotto. So,
for sure.
I can make risotto, but I find that sometimes so I've got my celery going into the Instant Pot. Again, I'm on saute mode. We're getting our aromatics in. We've got a couple of ribs of celery. Cameron's absolutely perfect knife skills.
I feel judged, though, that I'm not doing it the bougie way.
You're not. Risotto, I find sometimes when I get impatient with risotto, and I'm just trying to make it happen as I'm standing at the stove and I have a billion other things going on. You know what happens when you push through it? It gets gummy.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And that is just very, very unpleasant. There's not much you can do to fix it at that point. So the Instant Pot makes absolute perfect risotto. So then I took that a step further, and so you're very familiar with all the culinary terms that I invented. That
Zhuzh being the top priority.
Right. And we still don't know how to spell it. I was going to ask a friend of mine who's a linguist how to spell it. But the other thing that I made in the Instant Pot and had a lot of fun with the name, and I know you really like the name, I made barley risotto, but we called it Barlotto. So, but absolutely delicious. If you want to move away from the arborio white rice and have some whole grain in your life, we're still talking about butter and wine and Parmesan cheese here, but with that barley, perhaps we've moved into the healthy risotto world, if that's, it's kind of an oxymoron.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear it.
Yeah, but Barlotto was,
I'll ever go in?
Yep. So this red beans and rice, we are making completely vegan because we need this onion, so you can chop that
whole thing.
Yeah. Well, pass over half to me, and I'll cut the other half. So So let's talk about all my great ideas at Red Stick Spice, especially the ones where there are massive amounts of shade and hate about, and then they are not successful. They are smashing, majestic, just
comes out of the oven, angels come above.
But no, not just the dishes, Cameron. Let's talk about my concepts. First off, we've got to get our smoked olive oil in. This is all going to get somewhere here. Smoked olive oil, because it's vegan, no smoked meat, no smoked sausage, no tasso, but we want smokiness in here because that's what makes this delicious. So smoked extra virgin olive oil, a great alternative if you're not using any of those smoked meats, which is such a big part of Louisiana cuisine, especially where I grew up, all the smokehouses in Laplace. Okay, so class concept number one that everyone said, I don't know what's wrong with you, this will never work, was karaoke cooking.
Yeah.
How successful was karaoke cooking?
That was a blast.
Yeah.
And it was really fun. We had a lot of employees at Red Stick Spice come into that. It was a really good time.
Yeah. So, and we had a group of regular customers. They come to a lot of classes. It really took me by surprise because I was like, I wonder if they're taking the class because they're people watchers, because they're interested, or are they taking the class because they're into karaoke? Let's just say they were all there for the karaoke.
Honestly, yeah.
It was fantastic. Really, really great class. Okay, so then next class where I not only got a massive amount of shade from my staff, but also from friends and family who reached out to me, who said, what are you thinking, was our plant-based Cajun Creole class.
I know you got a text message from me about it.
Yeah. So among the many things that were said to me, so just really quickly, I'm listening to all the beeps from the Instant Pot. We are at 4 minutes on pressure cooking on the rice. So it took a little minute for it to get up to pressure, but once it's at pressure, we're at 4 minutes. And then we're going to listen for the other beep, because this one does require that we do a manual release on the steam. All right, so we've got our onion going in. So lots of shade about plant-based Cajun Creole. And did it work?
It did.
Or did it work?
Honestly, when you pulled that cake out of the oven.
Right. So this is one of the dishes we do in that class. And we did, we had folks who were curious about Cajun Creole cooking, but we also had a lot of folks who were vegetarian and vegan. And I think it really meant a lot to them that the way I approached it, because this wasn't about putting tofu in jambalaya, because I'm not a monster.
True.
This is about exploring the dishes that are already there, or exploring dishes either that were already there because they were already plant-based from the beginning, or dishes that only needed a minor tweak in order to make them plant-based. And red beans and rice is one of them.
For sure.
Definitely don't have to have that smoked sausage or tasso in there to bring great flavor. Okay, I need this garlic minced. I'm going in with 2 bay leaves. And so these aromatics are doing their thing and sauteing and getting nice and soft. It smells like a smokehouse met a bunch of delicious onions and aromatics. So just gorgeous color in here. They're getting soft, and you can smell that smoked olive oil coming out of there. So the other thing we're going to use to bring that smoky flavor, which we only use a half teaspoon in the whole recipe, which is fascinating.
Goes a long way.
Is that smoked sweet paprika. So I would say, so you do a lot of work on the floor with customers, and we counsel a lot of home cooks looking to get good, solid staples in their kitchen. And that's definitely one that I talk to customers a lot about, is making sure they have a good, solid granulated onion, granulated garlic, but also making sure they have a smoked paprika, a regular paprika, but also a smoked paprika, because it just does something that other spices can't do. Do you use it at
Paprika?
home?
Absolutely.
The smoked paprika? Do you use the hot or sweet?
I do the hot. If I want paprika, I always kind of want a little bit of heat in there.
It's a little too spicy
yeah, I know,
for
I'm
me.
sorry.
Yeah, I can't do the heat. So, all right, garlic is ready to go in. Let me take a peek at our recipe, because I think at this point we are going to cancel and go to pressure cook. So let's get our beans in. So these are dried beans, they're rinsed, not soaked. Those go in. We've got stock going in.
I can feel the onions because I'm getting emotional. I can feel them coming.
Stock's going in. This is perfect timing because we're about to press the button on the rice. And then we need a tablespoon of red bean seasoning. So our red bean seasoning, totally salt-free. But so cool.
Always needed in red beans and rice, something where you always want to adjust the salt for yourself.
So let's go ahead and get a tablespoon in there. I use this also on lentils.
Yum.
Yeah, really, really delicious on lentils. But this blend, the blender that we use for this blend approaches almost all of his blends from either a no salt or very, very low salt place. And so this is all about layering flavor and less about just cayenne or just salt. So this blend is based in bay and filet, which is really interesting to me because the only thing I used filet for growing up was to thicken gumbo, but it's actually a great blending ingredient. All right, I'm going to grab the smoked paprika, and we need about a half teaspoon of that. And you can eyeball that with your teaspoon measure there.
Sure. So
about a half teaspoon. And then we're going to do the salt at the end after it's done cooking. So we are going to get our lid on. We're going to press cancel. We're going to go up to pressure cook. We are going 37 minutes on high. We say start. It's going to take a minute to come up to pressure. 37 minutes, and then we have completely cooked red beans, which is crazy.
Pretty impressive.
Okay, I'll let you do the honors. Let's press the button on our rice. Get all that steam out of there.
Which one? This one?
That one there.
There we go.
So dramatic.
I love
Yay! Okay, so we're going to open that up and we're going to fluff our rice and we'll have that ready to go for when our red beans are ready.
Sounds delicious.
Okay? We're back. So we're ready to eat. So I'm going to have you chop up some parsley.
Okay.
So that we can garnish this. It brightens things up. A lot of times, things that are slow cooked, that sort of rich, that parsley can brighten it up. But the other reason I'm doing it is because, I'm going to be honest, red beans and rice isn't the prettiest dish in the world. So, I live in the world of, my husband owns a production company, and he takes lots of photos of our food. And a lot of times he'll say, "Oh, I can't take a picture of that. That's not gonna look good." And red beans and rice might be one of those. But I think based on the deliciousness, it's gorgeous. So first up, our rice, 4 minutes in the pressure cooker. We thank you for doing the manual release. And it is this interesting golden color from our vegetable stock that gets so dark from the onion skins that we use in the vegetable stock. So I've got some rice going in each dish.
I love the texture of it. It looks so not gummy, more loose.
Yeah. Now part of that is the popcorn rice. That's just that style of rice, but also the instant cooker. It cooks up nice and separate. So then what I did is I took the red beans were completely cooked. And I took a potato masher and mashed up about 2/3 of them. I grew up eating really creamy red beans and rice, so I mashed them up, and we're going to get those ladled into the bowl next to that rice, and then you're going to do some garnish magic so that that's a beautiful dish. But those are creamy, and they taste wonderful. Uh-oh.
I got you.
Thank you. Cameron's always there for me. All right, so we've got those red beans in there. And then clean the rim for me there, and then we are going to taste. So let's get some parsley on these. Parsley right there. And then let's have a taste. This looks like supper to me. Right.
First thing that stands out is the texture.
Yeah.
I've never seen anyone mash the beans before to make them creamy.
Yeah.
It just sort of happens.
Yeah.
Those are so good. And second thing that stands out to me is the no meat.
Yeah.
For sure. The smoked olive oil comes through and provides the smokiness that
but you get
the
all
meat
that smokiness. Yeah. So good. They're a little bit spicy, Cameron.
No. Never.
So delicious. This was wonderful. Thank you for doing this with me.
Of course.
You're
Anytime
always,
I get lunch.
You are a trooper. Thank you. All right. Thanks, guys.
So if you haven't pulled your Instant Pot out of the box yet, I'm not sure what more we can do. Big thanks to Bruce for coming on the show today. We are at the end of the episode, and we want to make sure you head over to our show notes to find Bruce, all of his books, his blog called Cooking with Bruce and Mark, and his podcast, which is also called Cooking with Bruce and Mark, which are both great reads and great listens. You'll also find a link to our recipe for Instant Pot red beans and rice that I cooked up with Cameron, and all the information and more is available at redstickspice.com. So again, we hope that we've inspired you to pull that Instant Pot out of the box, or maybe you already love your Instant Pot. In either case, we would love to hear from you. Please reach out to us on social media. You can find Red Stick Spice on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just for Smidgen listeners, we have a special discount code for you. Type in Smidgen15 at checkout for 15% off your entire order. Smidgen is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please subscribe and leave us a review. We would love to hear from you. You can also go to smidgenpodcast.com to find out everything about the show. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Smidgen.